Hello and welcome to the Insights podcast series. I'm your host, Anand Daniel. We are bringing to you a new, very special episode of the Future of X mini series, in which we discuss and try to decipher advancements and innovations that are underway in categories and industries that are changing fast. As the world changes because of the pandemic and its lingering after effects, the future is coming to us at speed. This series is an attempt to understand and make sense of everything that's rushing at us. Today's episode is a very special one. It is hosted by my colleague Manasi Shah, Vice President at Accel, and she has with him my good friend Bob Meese, who's Chief Business Officer at Duolingo, the world's most popular language learning app. Duolingo has been one of the most innovative and revolutionary edtech companies around the globe. The way they have responded to changing market conditions and shocks like the pandemic have made them one of the most successful edtech companies on the planet. Bob has played a huge part in this journey. We will be talking to Bob not only about Duolingo's growth story and innovations, but also about the learnings that have been in these years of the pandemic. The future of edtech is already here, and Bob is a great person to help us navigate it. Over to you, Manasi.
Great. Pleasure to have you here today, Bob. What an exciting time for Duolingo, for global edtech. It's just been amazing to see Duolingo's journey that has, of course, culminated, for those who don't know, in a wonderful IPO earlier this year in July. And great to see, even since Bob, the success of the Duolingo public stock, and we're valued at over $7 billion today, which is absolutely no easy feat for any consumer company, and great to see that for an edtech leader. So, Bob, very excited for the journey ahead. We're all believers in what lies in the future of Duolingo, but today maybe would love to relive some of the past, get some lessons from what were the key ingredients of success, help our founders in the audience learn from you and the Duolingo journey today. So welcome.
Yeah. Thank you. And Matsi, pleasure to join you today and talk about all of this.
Awesome. So Bob, would love to start with your own journey. You've obviously had a great kind of career in technology. What led you to Duolingo? Were you an avid languages fan when you were young? How did you choose such a strong winning team very early in the journey?
Sure. I can give a quick background where Duolingo has been incorporated since 2011. And so we've been around for about 10 years. And I joined halfway through that journey. So I joined the company right around 5 years ago in 2016. And there were a couple of reasons why I joined. Prior to that time, I had spent 8 years with Google based in California. And Duolingo it was a move for me and my family. We're based here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so in terms of what drew me to Duolingo, so there it was actually a bit of a homecoming for me, where I moved back to Pittsburgh. It's actually where I was born and where I grew up. And so there was a really interesting personal connection to this city and the tech development and the continuing trend that we're seeing, where Silicon Valley is a great place. But increasingly, we're seeing world-class companies be built in many different parts of our country, of the world, et cetera. And so it's been really gratifying to be part of that story, building a world-class company outside of the traditional tech hubs. And so the location of this company was a key part for me. And then another part was, as you mentioned, I've spent my career in technology, but right before Duolingo, I had been more on the gaming side within Google, where I spent the last 4 years of my time at Google leading the games team for Google Play. And so Duolingo is not a game, but it's game-like, and it's something where really anybody who spends enough time in gaming, it's awesome. It's a ton of fun. There's a lot of time spent in gaming, and so they're just trying to use what I had learned in gaming as a force for good, with a lot of the engagement mechanics and just making something so sticky, and then using that towards the goal of delivering education was really interesting for me. And so that background in Pittsburgh, my background in gaming, and then with any company, it's always, you need that alignment of just, I had been at Google for 8 years. It's a great company, but I'd been there long enough where I was looking around. And so I was at the right time in my Google history to do something new. And then Duolingo for me, it was the right company, right role, right time, where it was a really talented technical team that was here, a really fun product, and we can talk more about the Duolingo product as we go. And then the company was just starting to get serious about monetization and building a business. And so it was a really important initiative that I came in to help with for the company. And so all of that together made it a really compelling opportunity for me.
That's great to hear. I'm sure there are Googlers in the audience that are thinking that, hey, 7-8 years in, what's the next Duolingo I can go find? Did you know it was a winner from the start, Bob? Like when you joined, like first few months in, what was your experience inside the company?
Yeah, it's funny to look back on something I've been here 5 years, and in hindsight, it always looks up and to the right the whole way. The lived experience inside the company is certainly not that, right? There's certainly ups and downs. And for me, I didn't have the sense that it was a winner right away. If you have Googlers in the audience right now, I mean, Google is an amazing company and they do a great job of managing the incentives of their employees. And it's like, oh gosh, for me, it did feel financially irrational to join Duolingo. We were not making any money when I joined. And so it wasn't, I didn't just run a spreadsheet and say like, oh yes, this is an obvious winner, I'm going to go do this, right? So it did feel financially irrational a bit, but for me, it was just so compelling. And there, the quality of the people at Duolingo was, I said, okay, these people, you're a little bit spoiled at a place like Google where there's a lot of great people around you, but the quality, particularly of the technical team at Duolingo, is just amazing people. And so that was something that I really paid a lot of attention to. And then too, it's, 8 years in, I had a blast at Google, but the team that I was on, it was like the growth was starting to slow down a little bit. When I chose Duolingo, I said, this is going to be exciting. I know it is not going to be boring. It is a part of understatement, right? It was something that was exciting me, and that was a big piece. And then maybe another thing that I did is I was just making my own decision about whether to take this move. Is I spoke with a couple of other friends who had similar types of roles where they were in leadership roles at startups. They were not founders, but they were key members of the exec teams there. And that was just extremely energizing for me. And so there I was like, oh, okay, I've found my people in this way, right? And so all of these things together helped make it clear to me that I should make this move. But to your question, it was not like an obvious thing from the beginning that would be a winner, but I knew that even if it didn't work out, it would be an awesome experience and it would be a learning experience. And now 5 years in, it's great that it did work out. So it's even been great. So.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of startups. And sometimes you just have to trust the people, as you rightly said. So I'm sure the audience will appreciate that as they think through the next winning team, right, that they find. Bob, speaking of team, it does feel like, Duolingo had such a unique kind of founder at its core. So I've been fascinated by Luis. And for those who don't know, who are listening, Luis is the one-man army behind CAPTCHA and reCAPTCHA, which is the computer-led test that all of us are filling out day in and day out without even realizing, right? To prove that we're not robots. So, what an interesting kind of history. How was your kind of interaction with Luis? How did that impact kind of the journey of Duolingo to have this kind of a interesting founder at the core?
Yeah, no, it's a great point because we have our two co-founders, Luis and Cyber Hacker is the other, but for Luis as well too. So he has this background that's fairly well known, where he created CAPTCHA and reCAPTCHA and then sold reCAPTCHA to Google. He also was a MacArthur Genius Grant winner and had done these things and been a professor of computer science at Carnegie Mellon. And so he has this really impressive background. He had been a professor, and so he cares so much about education. And for Luis as well too, that goes back to his background, where both of our co-founders are actually immigrants into the United States. So they came here to Pittsburgh for Carnegie Mellon. Luis in particular is from Guatemala, which is a relatively poor country just south of Mexico in Central America. And Luis first came to the United States for college, but when he thinks about education, his background is extremely important in that. And for him, growing up in a country where there was less money, he observed that education was something that a lot of people think of it as a means for like equality, to bring equality to different social classes. for Luis, he saw the opposite of that, where he saw that for people who had more money were able to afford a better education, and that would lead them on a path towards a better life, versus for people who did not have much money or much means, they struggled to even get a basic education, and that led them to a very different path in life. And so Luis, just having seen that basis, really very much at his core, wanted to provide access to education. And then for him also being a technologist, having tech-enabled tools where you can deliver education on a great scale was another part of that too. So for him, just the mission of the company is kind of been brewing in him since he was probably a little boy too. And there, just that level of conviction that this is Duolingo's not a company that kind of came about on a whim, right? That this is something where there's an incredible amount of conviction on our founding team, and then Luis in particular, based on where he comes from.
I love hearing that. I think it's not easy sometimes to balance a mission with a really, really large business. And it's beautiful to see kind of the way Duolingo has balanced both, and also, in fact, leverage technology to actually make it possible, right? To bring this access of language learning to all. So very inspiring, Bob. I'm sure, the folks who face this dilemma and can hopefully use technology as a strength rather than a trade-off in any way. One of the things you mentioned, Bob, which I think ties in beautifully to the mission, is to bring a lot of free education to millions around the world. And the idea of monetization, obviously, I think for Duolingo came a little bit later than one typically sees, right? So maybe could you talk through that journey? Like how did you all figure out what was the right time to monetize? What were tensions that you might have faced around that? And then ultimately, what framework did you all use to arrive at what is, of course, a significant amount of revenue today?
Yeah. I can speak to that. And part of it too, I mentioned I joined in 2016, and we were at the very beginning of monetization, and so I can speak to the part of the journey that I was on, and then even the part before I got here of like, should we monetize? When do we start to get serious about this? For the company too, mobile certainly helped a lot. And so there's, as we talked about, we have an amazing founding team, and they're incredibly talented. We also recognize that we were somewhat fortunate, where Duolingo launched in 2011 and then launched on mobile in 2012. And here in the United States and other parts of the world, that was a time where there was just rapid growth with mobile. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that enabled us to defer, or enabled Luis and Severin and the team to defer monetization a little bit longer, was there was just like crazy rapid growth, more of that like land grab kind of moment that was there of just focus on growth. And the company had a lot of discipline at that time too, where even though there wasn't as much of a focus on monetization, it was just grow the audience as much as possible. And so that was a really key focus for the first several years of the company. And I think the advice that Luis was getting from investors and others at that time was, you don't need to worry about monetization quite yet. Just grow. But after a couple of years of that, it became more important to then start to show the business metrics around that. And part of what happened there, before I joined, there was kind of a fork in the road in terms of where the company would go with regards to monetization, where before that time, the original founding business model of the company, Luis gave a TED Talk way back in 2011, where he talked about launching Duolingo. And there, the business model that he considered then was this translation, translate the web business model. However, that didn't work out. And to the company's credit, they quickly pivoted away from that. And then tried like another business around testing, which we can talk about later. But that was something that was a really innovative product, but it wasn't going to be that massive scale driver for the business for revenue. And so that was what we had tried early. And right before I joined, there was a moment where we said, will we as a company, Duolingo, pursue a more product-led, product-driven approach towards monetization? Or would we take more of a Salesforce enterprisey approach towards monetization? And I wasn't yet here at that time, but what I understand, there was that was a key discussion at the board level, and it was not unanimous. There were people who were in either camp for that, but the company, as you might expect, decided on that more product-led approach. And so that was a really key decision for the company. And so these are the things that happened before I joined. If you ask the founders now about whether they thought they waited for the ideal time, or maybe they started like a little bit too early or a little bit too late, I think they would say that they wish they had started maybe a little bit earlier, not so much earlier, but there, if that we just would have probably been a little bit more further ahead if we had started a little bit earlier, but everything worked out. And so that's the part before I get here. And so I'll pause there just to see if you want to redirect me in any way, or if I could just talk more about then the part that I joined in the frameworks that we use.
Yeah, maybe just some sense of scale around when we started monetizing, and of course where it is today, given we're public, some sense of how that panned out.
Yes, yeah. So sense of scale in terms of various metrics. So around the time that I joined, we were, from a user perspective, audience perspective, about 20 million MAU around that time. So it was a healthy size audience. The company was, in terms of employee population, around like 65, 70. So, pretty big by that, mostly engineers. And so if you looked at the composition of those employees, engineering was by far the biggest team. And then we had the second largest team was actually design. Just if you think about the DNA of Duolingo and the different pieces that go into it, and then everything else was tiny. There were like 2 product managers, 2 marketers, 1 finance person. So it was just a collection of these things. And so that was it. And then monetization was like de minimis. There were a couple of tests that were going on, but it was basically 0. And so that was some of the key metrics in terms of the situation that I came into.
I know you said 65, 70 is large, Bob, but getting to 20 million monthly active users with that size is very inspiring, and obviously speaks to kind of how product-led the growth was. So we'd love to come back to the product-led kind of growth, how we cracked it. But touching upon, you were saying some frameworks that you all used, which might be very helpful to our founders today. We're increasingly seeing more distribution-first models, right? That let us go grab the customers, we'll monetize later. And there's a very rampant debate about, what's the right approach? Will these companies ever make money? And of course, we've proven out very well on how to execute on that. So any frameworks there that our founders could apply would be really helpful.
Sure. I can speak to the early monetization experiments that we had once I joined. And so there, I mentioned that the core belief for us was it would be this product-led piece around monetization. But that said, we tried other things as well too. So when we came in, we wanted, Duolingo is very experiment driven. And so I'll quickly talk about some other things we did. We even had like a brief pilot style partnership led opportunity with Pearson Education to access more of like the higher ed market. And it was, we tried that briefly. The smart thing we did was we didn't overcommit to it. We tested doing it, and the quick feedback that we got was, this is way too slow. And so just being in these annual cycles and being dependent on a partner that would slow us down. One of the key parts of Duolingo's DNA is moving very, very quickly, where we launch a new version of the product every single week. And so being beholden to a partner. And so we tried some of those things. But coming back to the core product-led piece, that one of the key things that we did was just focusing on what was already working at the company, because there can be a temptation sometimes, this other like partner-led thing of, okay, we're trying to do this new thing. There's this new metric with monetization and bookings and revenue that we now care about, and there can be a temptation of do something very different than what we've done. It turned out for us that there were a lot of core building blocks with regards to our approach towards experimentation and A/B testing that the company had used with regards to driving user growth that was really an important foundation for us to then drive monetization. And so we were actually using a core strength of the company, but applying it in a different way. And that was a really core source of our success for monetization. And so that's a foundation. And then one piece too is we're very metrics focused and goal focused. Mm-hmm. And so there, as we started to build that muscle around monetization, I mean, don't get us wrong. Like the first 6 months were kind of a mess. So we were kind of just getting started, and we didn't quite. We were just putting processes in place, and it was hard. And we can talk about that. But one of the things I think we got right was, I joined in the second half of 2016, and so we started setting weekly and monthly goals for monetization, and that was difficult and awkward. The one thing that we did was trying to set our goals for calendar year 2017, because that was a really important piece. And for us, we would set ambitious goals. We use OKRs like many companies do, and we would set this really ambitious goal, but then we would give ourselves flexibility with how to reach that goal. And so for us, as we thought about monetization, we had this composition that was all across ads and in-app purchases and subscriptions. And we had independent teams working on all of these different initiatives. But it was all very small, but we had more independent teams working on them. But we really focused on what was the overall goal that we wanted to get to. And then when something was working, we would double down on that. When something was slow or not working, we would take resources away. But that piece of, as I mentioned, using the A/B testing and looking at a core strength of the company and applying that towards monetization. And then for monetization, focusing on that goal and then giving ourselves enough flexibility in terms of how we'd achieve that goal.
Very interesting. So saying don't over-engineer the more kind of granular or tactical goals. Instead, have the overarching target that you're working towards, but then keep experimenting within. That's super insightful, Bob. How many experiments were running around monetization at maybe its peak or at any given time?
I can speak to right now. I mean, right now, experiments are at the core of Duolingo, and at the company level, right now we're running more than 200 concurrent experiments, and so it's a lot, right? So people see the Duolingo app, and it's cute, and it's a great consumer app, and so people can think wow, this nice cute app, but then beneath the surface, there's so much sophistication that goes into it, and so that's a sense of the overall experiments. Monetization is a minority of that, so it's it's not like it's all of it, but it's a substantial amount. So there's dozens and dozens of monetization experiments that are running at any given time, and that's a really core strength for our company.
Wow, 200 experiments. Maybe could you give us a peek under the hood? Like how do you manage those? How do you build that culture of experimentation kind of within the entire org? How do you not rebuke failure, right? Because a lot of things might not work. So if you're the person on that team that failed, what happens? Would love to double click on this and help our founders kind of get some of this experimentation culture.
Yeah. We've written a fair amount about it too. So if people just want to Duolingo and experimentation or A/B testing, there's a lot of content that is out there. But for us, one thing that helps in terms of perception of failure is just there's such a volume of experiments that we're not beholden to any one, right? Part of the Duolingo story and the success story is just having it, organizing ourselves. As I mentioned, it's a more technical team, and so we don't have a lot of overhead. A lot of the core people, like the core investment for us, is around product and engineering and design, the core R&D functions, and we've managed to structure our company in a way such that these teams can operate relatively independently. And so there's not a lot of need for coordination or overhead that's happening. And so one is just the volume. And then the other is having the right amount of preparation in advance, because sometimes you can go too far with experimentation, or it can be a crutch. Because there you can say, oh, I don't need to have a hypothesis, or I don't need to think about something in advance. I'll just test it. And it's important to recognize that can lead to lazy thinking. And so for us, we have a process that we've also written about, and you can find online too, of, well, depending on the size of the change that we're focused on, we'll have pre-work about, here's like a one-pager or a document that describes what the experiment will be. And there it's the expected change in metrics, and why we're making this change. And there the bigger the investment, the more upfront work and analysis is required. But we do have, just over time, we've really honed this process, and it works quite well. I'll describe a little bit too, just to make it a little bit more tangible in terms of like what these experiments are about.
Yeah.
Because for Duolingo, we're very metrics focused, as I mentioned. For me, I work more closely with our monetization teams. We've grown a bit. I mean, it used to be like a very small number of people. We had just a single monetization team. Now we've evolved such that we have areas of the company. And at a high level, we have three main things that we focus on. The first, of course, is around learning, because we're a learning product. And so if the people who are using Duolingo are not learning, then we're not doing our job. And so the most important and the largest area of our company is around learning. The second is around user growth. Just that's a really core part of what we do in making our product really engaging and entertaining. And then the third main thing is around monetization. And so within all of those areas, there's independent experiments that are happening across all of them. And so for monetization, it historically has been around building up ads and in-app purchases and subscriptions. As we've increasingly become a subscription business, the majority of our monetization experiments are focused on subscriptions. For our other areas, we have like new and different learning experiences that are coming out all the time. And like learning is such a fascinating part of what we do. And then for the user growth side, there's a lot of things that we've become known for, where we've become known for our streak. For Duolingo, there's people who have, there's maybe a surprising amount of people who have been using Duolingo every single day for the last year and more. There's people with 1,000-day streaks, 2,000-day streaks. You start to do the math, and it's a pretty remarkable achievement. And so that streak has really been powerful. Our notifications also have been really powerful as well too, where we've almost become we have become a meme at various points as well too. And so these are some examples for the user growth part of what we do, where once we identify one of these key drivers or key mechanics, then we just like keep working and testing and experimenting and making that better and better and better. And that's a really key driver for us.
Got it. Very interesting. And so it looks like lot of experiments running, creating the right environment where failing doesn't matter, but it's important to prepare. And looks like doubling down on when you know something is working is kind of also very strong built-in muscle into what comes next. Very, very helpful, Bob. I'm sure a lot of us can kind of apply these tactics. I'm just curious about who thinks of the experiment, right? Is it top down? Is it that anyone can be creative, come up with an idea and experiment with it, and then maybe putting it a little bit in context of our founders who might be at an even earlier stage. How should they think about where experiments and ideas should come from?
Yep. Yeah, for us, they come from all over, where they in the best case, we really try to enable the teams and empower the teams such that they're coming up with ideas. One of the things that we've done quite well is within team meetings, sometimes we're managing the sprint and we're assigning tasks and it's just like a very structured meeting. In other cases, and especially certain parts of Duolingo have done a nice job of brainstorming. And so it's an important part of our culture, just thinking about and managing even the scope of that too. I mean, the scope can be anything as broad as like subscriptions or something much narrower about, okay, we have an opportunity around a family plan. Let's think about what that might look like. And so the brainstorms have been really important. As you can imagine, over the last year and a half, we've been in person a little bit less often, a lot less often. And so that's something we think about. But in the ideal case, that the teams are driving a lot of that. In the brainstorming that some of our teams in particular have done is great. We do get ideas from many places where, Luis is like a brilliant product thinker. And so he has our head of product from other areas. Another thing that we've done a pretty nice job, and this is something that I've helped bring in, is just speaking to other companies as well. Because for Duolingo, there's a lot of innovation that comes from us as a company. We also need to recognize that we don't need to innovate across every single dimension of our company, or there's a lot of other similar businesses around just other like non-education, non-language learning, like self-improvement apps, where we can look at what they're doing. And there's a lot of smart people out there that are doing these things. And so we certainly use a lot of other leading mobile applications, observe them, and actually speak with those teams as well too. So for us, the ideas are coming from a lot of different places.
Got it. That's I love the last point. It's not a limited pie that you're kind of taking away from each other, right? We're actually growing the pie by exchanging these insights with other strong consumer products and finding someone else who solved the problem before.
Yes.
Is a great idea. And wonderful, Bob. Bob, I think one question that I've always had looking at Duolingo is, when I meet a lot of edtech companies, a lot of our consumer companies, retention is something that kind of folks, very often run into as a challenge. And on the flip side for Duolingo, despite doubling, I think almost in the last year, we have almost 50% of our revenue coming from repeat users who love us. So how did we, solve retention as a challenge in this world where there are so many competitor products? Language learning itself, people can easily I dropped it off very easily. So how do you retain customers?
Yeah. Retention is really at the core of what we do, and for us as well. One of the insights we even had, and we articulated it more, is that the hardest thing about learning a language, or the hardest thing really about learning anything on your own, is staying motivated. Yep. And so it's really at the core of how we think about so many parts. And so that expression has been helpful for us. And then even talking about the beginnings of Duolingo, where very product and engineering focused company, we weren't making any money. And so at that time, that there was no business case we made where we should spend a lot of money on performance marketing or doing some of these things. And we just didn't have that option as a company. And so basically all of the resources for the company were being funneled into making the product stickier and stickier. And so we've talked about that a little bit too, where one of the key metrics we focused on was just start with day one retention, because there it's, as you have that funnel, it's, the other later retention metrics matter. But if you can't get somebody to come back the next day, then that's it. And just one point of clarification too is around retention, because we think about retention in multiple different ways. The primary way that we think about retention is just of the total population of users. And so people that are using the free version of our product, or people who are already subscribers of Duolingo as well too, but just people that are coming back and using Duolingo in any capacity, in the retention of those people. That's the primary way that we think about retention. But then, of course, now we have a subscription as well too. And so there's subscriber retention and things that we do to keep people as subscribers of Duolingo. And so we think about retention in multiple different ways, but the primary way is around the overall free plus paid user retention at Duolingo. And one metric there I mentioned, it's been a core focus for a while. When Duolingo first launched, that day one retention was only about 13%, 13. It's like now more than 50. And so that's just, you see the benefits of continuous focus on that and compounding gains. And so that's really paid off for us. And I'll stop there and see if you want to redirect me in any of that.
No, that's very, very helpful to hear that. Firstly, when you're at 13%, don't worry, the path to getting to 50% plus. And then sounds like tying it back to your experimentation, running the right experiments, seeing what works, and growing that number. Bob, one insight that would be really helpful is, what does best in class retention look like? It could be ours, it could be something we aspire to. But you mentioned D1 of 50% plus. What else do we track to know that retention is on track, and what do those metrics look like?
Yeah, for retention for us, because we've done a really nice job. It's a matter of benchmarking, and for us as well too, because for other edtech products, when we have our own data, and then the app stores have increasingly been helpful in terms of helping companies benchmark themselves against a peer group or another category. When we get that feedback back from the app stores, we really can't even use Edtech or other language learning companies as a benchmark, because we're like so much higher that we're kind of like off the chart with regards to that peer group. And so when we think about how to benchmark our retention and user engagement, games are one that we use. And so we're not a game, but our retention and engagement is more game-like than we are like Edtech companies. And so when we think about benchmarks, those are some of the ones that we use. We have the other piece too, where around that streak is something that we're focused on, because a lot of it is around habit building and getting these early signs of habit formation as well too. So for us, when someone starts using Duolingo, if we can help encourage somebody to get on, for us, we really focus on like a 7-day streak, and we look at the percentage of Duolingo users that have a 7-day streak, and that's one of those metrics that's a core metric for us, and we're really trying to improve that percentage time over time, because for us it really is that habit formation. And when you see new people coming into Duolingo, or you had mentioned you've kind of like fallen off, is you see people come back. And if we can help somebody develop that habit over the course of the week using Duolingo every single day, that really is really favorable for us as we think about longer term retention.
Got it. That's very insightful, Bob. Any kind of broad ranges that our founders should aspire towards based on your understanding of games? And I really like the idea of expanding the horizon. Like, don't restrict yourself to just looking at edtech products, right? Like, be the best in class. What does that kind of best in class look like? Like, we've seen content apps at like D30 of 40-50% when like TikTok was kind of raging in India. What in your mind is like a really strong benchmark to aspire towards?
Just thinking generally, a really important part of it too is understanding the use case for your product, and so for us as well too, because that's where we have this daily habit that we like. But then one of the dynamics in our business as well is that we can have episodic use, where someone will come in and use Duolingo for several months, and then they'll fall off, and then some period later they'll come back again. And so it's a question of how to think about that person. And then similarly, there's, I mentioned we speak to other leading subscription apps. For the dating apps, they have a very different profile in terms of retention, and even just what retention means for them. Churn can be a success metric, which is different than most services. And so part of it really is you think about some of these metrics, it is important to not overly generalize, and look at like different types of subscription categories, and that's why I'm hesitating a little bit to just give you a single number on like, hey, target like this number for day 30 retention. And so it is important to really focus on the use case for your product and what you're trying to encourage. But for us, when you get like the further out, day 30, day 60, day 90, you want to be keeping at least double digits of those people who come in. And then the closer you can be to, the 20%, like that's really strong for these types of products. I mean, as you mentioned, like games, and then other social services, like social services are even the highest retainers of basically anything, right? And that is, maybe social services like retain people too well, right? There's some of those things too, but for apps that are like Duolingo and trying to provide education, having something in the teens months out is a good target.
Very helpful, and really great point that describe your customer behavior and then map retention to it. Sometimes we blindly chase numbers, and that doesn't do justice to your own product and customer. Makes a lot of sense, Bob. Bob, there are so many aspiring founders in India building for the world. We've of course seen a lot of software kind of go out from India. We're actually increasingly seeing a lot of edtech being built in India and being taken out, serving customers in US, other geographies. I have never seen any edtech product as global as Duolingo. So how did you crack kind of, I think you're in 100 plus countries. So what does go to market mean in the organization? How did you all approach it, in terms of being truly global in the full sense?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think we've done a good job so far. We've benefited from mobile and smartphones and the app stores there, where just the ability for a relatively modest sized company based honestly anywhere in the world, and through the power of these distribution systems, to be able to distribute your application everywhere has been really powerful. And so for us, when we think about just reaching a very global audience, a lot of the foundation is smartphones and the app stores, and that's been a piece too. We've also been strategic about our use of marketing and PR and earned media too. We had talked about Luis earlier, and he has a lot of different skills. He's a really great speaker and communicator, and very charismatic as well too. And so some of the stories early on in the company's history was when we were opening a new market, we would we would create the relevant course and make ourselves available there and localize, do all the things you would expect. And then Luis would go somewhere and give a talk, and we would create a media moment around that, and that would just spike a country. And so there we were looking to do something that was in some ways not super scalable, in that the founder of the company needs to go out and do these things. But on the other hand, it was basically free earned media. And there the company would see these spikes that would happen. And so that was one of the ways that we started to grow in different parts of the world. I'll mention too that in general, we try to keep Duolingo as similar as possible from a product perspective in many different markets. That is a core belief of Luis's and several of us on the team as well too, where we can receive feedback of like, oh, XYZ is different in this geography. And you'll hear that. And those points of feedback are valid. But at the same time, if we got into a world where we were creating extremely custom versions of our product for many different markets, then things just don't scale. And so when we think about global distribution, I think part of our success has been the default for us has been to keep the product experience as similar as possible in as many markets. And so I think that's helped. And then as we look forward with regards to global distribution, I think we've been off to a good start. We've done the more general, more scalable thing to date, but there is a lot of room for improvement for us, where I had mentioned that I had been at Google Play before I joined Duolingo. When I joined Google Play, the international team at Google Play was just a single person. It was like a very tiny team. It's very early days. And then during my time there, we hired amazing people in many markets all across the globe. And so I've really seen the benefit of having team members in country who can provide those local insights and bring it back to the company as well too. And that can really be a game changer. And for us, we're actually quite early in that process, where we have one larger international office in Beijing right now, and then we've just opened our first in Europe. And then we have individual country marketing managers in a number of other places. We actually just hired our first employee in India only just last month. And so in some ways we have a really solid foundation, and I appreciate the comments around just Duolingo's distribution. But in other ways, we're really just getting started in having a more of a local presence that I'm sure will be super helpful for us.
Got it. Looks like there's a lot more in store then. And good to also know that it's okay to do things that don't scale early on, but give, kind of spark off that engine. And looks like we're still growing that, which is amazing to see. Bob, it's, such a pleasure to learn about the internal kind of engine and what has worked. And it's no surprise that Duolingo has made it so far. That said, I know that a lot of our founders go through ups and downs, and I'm sure Duolingo's journey was no different. And sometimes it's important to know that successes today actually went through pretty tough challenges, right? So if you don't mind sharing a time when it wasn't so obvious that we would be where we are, and how we overcame that as a team in terms of morale, what we did, that would be really helpful.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned earlier on that when I first started, it was not obvious that Duolingo 5 years ago would grow into what it is today. And so when I think back to my first 6 months in the company too, it's tricky. It's hard. Most of the things that we tried then didn't work super well. And it's anything from, as we started to take monetization more seriously, we didn't have the right team in place. One of the things there is we had a team. One of the signals when I joined was for our high performing teams, there's just so much energy in the room. And at the time that I joined, we had like a very small monetization team, and the meetings were not great. They were like very low energy, and we just so we didn't yet have the right people. Yet at the same time, we're this very ambitious company. And so I remember the first full quarter that I was here, we were setting these very ambitious goals, and we were measuring our progress against them weekly. And we were missing it more and missing it more. and it was hard, right? So we didn't quite have the right team. We had set these ambitious goals. We were clearly failing. For myself as well too, I mentioned that I had moved to a new city, and I remember trying to hire people that I knew to come to Pittsburgh. And there was one person in particular I really tried to recruit quite hard and tried as hard as I could, and I failed. And we tried to bring this person into Duolingo, and the person declined. And I just remember I was like, oh man, I guess we just need to do this on our own and just figure it out. And so that was hard, but you get through those times. And so those first 6 months in general were definitely hard. And it's not like it changed overnight, but there you start to have some amount of traction and some amount of progress. Like there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And then with regards to monetization as well too, I mentioned that there were some things we did that worked, but I've certainly worked on my fair share of projects here that have failed. I think that for me, just one of the things I tell myself is like, gosh, if like everything is working, then you're not taking enough risks. And so I'd mentioned this more partnership centric thing that thankfully we didn't commit too many resources to. And for some time that looked like it might be successful, but then about 1 year in, it was clear that was not going to be something that we should continue doing. And so just finding like a graceful way to wind that down. Another is we have advertising in our product, and we've found a way to do it in a very lightweight and scalable way just by working through ad networks. That wasn't always our plan. We tried direct ad sales briefly and hired some people to come in and build that business, but then relatively quickly realized that it was not working, and we were not really committed to doing that, and had to shut that down as well too. So it's I know for founders, it's like, gosh, they're taking huge risks and asking people to join their company, and then if the initiative that these people are not working on, they need to just those people can't continue working at the company, and there's like this human element that's really hard, and as a founder, that's just part of the deal. And then is early stage employees or people who are joining a company that's still in a growth phase or still not making any money or is not profitable. People get that they're taking a risk in joining a company of that profile, but still at the same time, it makes it painful to go through that process.
Yeah, no, I'm sure a lot of us resonate with this. It's not easy most times, I would say, right? If we picked up any of our founders, but the thing to remember, I loved how you said it, which is if everything is working, you're not taking enough risks. So that's one to remember for all of us. Wonderful. Bob, looking at the future of EdTech, right? So there's so many lessons from the past that we can apply. What kind of excites you? What do you see panning out even more in the future? What are trends that our budding founders in the audience can kind of capitalize on? Would love to hear that from you.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about the future of EdTech, or just the current state of EdTech, when we think about what Duolingo has helped contribute, it is funny of just the way that EdTech is perceived right now versus 5 years ago. I mean, or earlier. I mean, EdTech was a bit of a bad word with regards to investing a lot, right? There were times when EdTech felt like it was synonymous for bad business. And so that I think has changed, and Duolingo has been part of changing that. And I think part of how we've helped change it is we have a bit of a different business model where we're a very much more consumer-centric company than most traditional EdTech companies. And for us, the freemium model that we have, we've really innovated on the business model side. And so when I think about the future of EdTech, Duolingo hopefully is help bring new business models that are more consumer and more generally help to blur the lines between world-class consumer services of any type, where we had talked about games, we had talked about social services, we had talked about other forms of self-improvement. And so we're really hoping to blend and mix together best-in-class learnings from many different categories and types of services with the core innovation that we're driving as well too, where as I've mentioned several times, like education and learning is the core of what we do. It's where we're investing the most resources, but we see this future where we need to earn our spot, right? We want to be a service that people of all ages want to use Duolingo. And so when I think about the future of education, just having these delightful products that deliver on the educational outcomes, but then also deliver on like a great user experience and just keeping people engaged over time is a really important part of the future of education.
Love that. Yeah. Don't let's not boundary ourselves into just being an edtech product, but be the best consumer product out there, be the best B2B product out there. I think is a great takeaway. Do you feel like some of these trends that you're seeing, at least on ground, we're seeing a lot in India, in the US, around things like that are more sometimes like services, cohort-based courses, things like that. They feel like they're a little bit more human-centric than product-led. Are there ways to kind of bring in product as a source of the customer delight to these experiences?
I think so. I think now that it's interesting that there's a lot of different approaches that are being tried. And for Duolingo, we certainly start with more of a product and technology centric approach, but we're very focused on experimentation. And so we continue to do new things. And so for some of the services that you mentioned that take a different approach that are more human centric, I think for a lot of us, just trying to decompose or unpack, like, what are we trying to accomplish? And then what are the sub goals of that? So when we think about it, it's like there's learning, but then within learning, you can teach somebody speaking skills or reading skills or listening skills or reading skills, right? And so we decompose all those things, and then we think about, okay, which of those skills are we doing a great job in our current approach towards tech-enabled learning? And what are the areas where maybe a different approach would work better, and to continue to iterate through that. And so as you think about these other companies where they start with a more human-centered approach, and then they're thinking about how to add product enablement to that, I would imagine that just acquiring new users or having like a more lightweight user experience early on in like the user journey might be a good place to start. Just the ability to reach more people, especially for just so many digital services, right? That there's such an advantage in our business of being able to reach more and more people at zero marginal cost. Yep. And there for a lot of these businesses, you will always need to reach more people. And so finding scalable ways to do that. And if at the end of their funnel, they have like a really compelling, but more commitment is required to that experience, just continuing to figure out how to broaden the top of the funnel with more product-based approaches is a smart thing to pursue.
Absolutely. That's a great point on, using product in a very complementary way to acquire, to engage, a lot of the ideas you mentioned in terms of streaks and gamification can be huge leverages to any kind of human-led approach as well. So super helpful to hear, Bob. Bob, have learned so much from you today. I think I'm trying to think of my favorite kind of line, debating between two, right? The one you said about, if everything's going right, you're not taking enough risks, kind of really stayed with me. But the other one I really loved is, grow the pie. If you're you're an edtech founder, talk to your neighbor, right? Learn from each other. And that's what kind of helped Duolingo also get here. So
Yes.
Been phenomenal to learn from you and have you here. I know we'll be hearing so much more of Duolingo ahead. So for folks in the audience who've not learned a new language recently, I think it's time to time to pick up the app. I'm sure they'll all face the same kind of customer delight that we've spoken about today.
Cool. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thanks so much, Bob.
What a brilliant conversation. I thank Bob for coming on and sharing all these stories and insights. I enjoyed listening to them and learned even more. Thanks to Manasi as well for anchoring a terrific podcast. We wish Bob all the best for him and for the Duolingo team, which continues to blaze a trail. More founders and teams will follow. That's it for this time from us. Please subscribe to our podcast if you haven't already. Our website is seed2scales.com/insights, where you can find other such episodes from our series. Thanks again for listening. Goodbye and stay safe.